The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the slick pavements of Boston as if the heavens themselves were weeping for the forgotten souls wandering its cold streets. Among them stood Aurora Bennett, her figure small against the towering glass facade of the Caldwell Grand Hotel, the very place where she spent her days scrubbing marble floors and polishing crystal chandeliers that reflected a life she could never afford, her hazel eyes wide with exhaustion and quiet sorrow, chestnut brown hair clinging damply to her flushed cheeks as she pulled her worn-out jacket tighter around her trembling frame. A jacket that had once been her mother's before illness confined the woman to a hospital bed miles away, a mother Aurora visited after every shift, carrying whatever leftovers she could salvage from banquets she wasn't invited to, whispering promises that one day things would be better, even if she herself didn't fully believe them. Tonight was worse than most. The last bus had long rumbled away, the train services suspended by the storm, leaving her stranded in the dead of night with only the hum of distant traffic and the sharp bite of wind slicing through her thin clothes, her shoes soaked through, socks clinging cold against her feet. She thought briefly of walking the 10 miles home, but fatigue weighed heavier than her resolve, and so she lingered under the flickering glow of a street lamp, arms crossed in a desperate attempt to hold herself together, unaware that fate was moments away from shifting the trajectory of her entire life. Headlights cut through the rain, a sleek black SUV gliding to a stop beside her, its polished exterior glistening like onyx under the downpour, tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. Her first instinct was to step back, heart hammering in her chest, but before fear could fully bloom, the window rolled down, revealing a fax. He's so arrestingly handsome it momentarily stole her breath. Sharp jawline, midnight black hair slicked perfectly back, and eyes so piercingly blue they seemed to glow even in the darkness. Eyes that carried both authority and a softness she couldn't quite place. "Need a ride?" The stranger's voice broke through the rain, low and steady, rich with quiet confidence yet surprisingly gentle, the kind of voice that made promises without words. Aurora hesitated, instincts warring with exhaustion. Every rule her mother ever taught her screamed not to get into cars with strangers, yet something about him was disarming. Not in charm alone, but in the subtle respect in his gaze, as though he saw her not as a drenched cleaner but simply as a person in need. Water streamed down her cheeks, rain or tears, she couldn't tell anymore. As she gave the faintest nod, her voice lost to the storm, and before she could second-guess herself, she found herself sliding into the warmth of the passenger seat, her soaked clothes immediately fogging the leather interior. The contrast between them was stark. Her frayed jacket against his immaculate tailored suit, her calloused hands folded in her lap beside his manicured grip on the steering wheel. Worlds apart. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. He glanced at her briefly, the corner of his lips tugging into something between a smile and concern, and she whispered a thank you, barely audible over the sound of rain against glass. Neither spoke as the car pulled into motion, the silence not awkward but heavy with unspoken questions. Who was he? Why did he stop? Why did she trust him? And yet neither dared break it, perhaps sensing that words would cheapen whatever fragile thread had just connected them. Aurora stared out the window at the blurred city lights, her reflection faint beside the stranger's, unaware that this ride was the first page of a story neither of them were prepared to write. A story that would unravel secrets buried beneath wealth and struggle. A story that would wound and heal in equal measure. A story where two broken pieces would somehow find completion in each other. And as the SUV disappeared into the rain-slicked night, carrying them toward an uncertain future, neither knew that this chance encounter, this single act of kindness, would one day be remembered, not for the storm outside, but for the storm it awoke within their hearts. The next morning the storm had calmed, but Ethan Caldwell's thoughts had not. Even as sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse overlooking Boston's skyline, the image of a rain-drenched girl in a worn jacket haunted him, her soft thank you echoing louder than the applause he usually received at board meetings, and for the first time in years, he felt restless in his own world of glass and gold. He returned to the Caldwell Grand Hotel later that day, his steps leading him not to the executive offices where shareholders awaited him, but to the unpolished wings of the building he rarely visited, the wings where cleaning carts squeaked across tiled floors, where workers like Aurora Bennett silently held the hotel together. The moment he saw her, crouched by the marble lobby stairs scrubbing away a stubborn stain, strands of chestnut hair escaping her ponytail and brushing her damp cheek, something inside him shifted, admiration laced with guilt, because though he owned the empire she toiled in, she had no idea who he really was. Determined to know her without the shadow of his last name, Ethan approached quietly, introducing himself simply as Ethan, a visiting business consultant, masking the weight of his family name and fortune behind the easy smile of a stranger. Aurora looked up, startled, her hazel eyes widening briefly before softening into polite warmth. To her, he was just another face passing through, yet there was something about his presence, a strange calmness amid her chaotic days, that disarmed her walls. Over the next few days, their paths crossed more often than coincidence should allow. In staff corridors where she pushed carts piled with linens, in the service elevator they once shared in silence, and at the back entrance where she took her meager lunch breaks alone. Each meeting unraveled her reserve a little more. Ethan asked questions most never cared to ask. Did she like working here? Did she always dream of hotels? And Aurora, surprised by her own honesty, confessed pieces of herself. How she once wanted to study interior design, how her mother's illness forced her into endless shifts, how every paycheck seemed to vanish into hospital bills. Ethan listened, not as a billionaire seeking amusement, but as a man humbled by the quiet courage of a woman who carried burdens without bitterness. He found himself envying her resilience, her unshaken kindness. She, who had nothing, somehow possessed everything he lacked. But as closeness bloomed in those quiet hallways, someone else began to notice. Madeline Whitmore, Ethan's fiancée in name but stranger in heart, had grown accustomed to being adored, envied, and obeyed. Hers was a world of designer gowns and calculated alliances, and she had always assumed Ethan was hers, not out of love, but convenience, a deal their fathers signed in the cold language of power. Yet lately, Madeline's calls went unanswered, her dinners rescheduled, and when she glimpsed Ethan lingering near the staff quarters, laughter softening his usually stoic face, a pang of something raw, jealousy laced with fury, clawed at her chest. Who was this cleaner, this nobody who dared steal glances from the man Madeline believed she owned? She began to watch from afar, her emerald eyes narrowing each time Aurora passed, her mind already spinning schemes wrapped in silk and poison. Meanwhile, Ethan's internal war deepened. Every moment spent with Aurora was a moment stolen, precious yet fragile, for he knew the truth loomed like a storm cloud. The revelation that he was not just Ethan the consultant, but the heir to the empire she struggled to survive within. Would she see him as a liar? Would she believe the sincerity of his feelings? Or would she think him cruel, another rich man playing with the heart of someone who had nothing to give but herself? These questions gnawed at him each night, lying awake in sheets that felt colder than the rain-soaked SUV from which their story began. And as Aurora's smile lingered in his thoughts, Ethan vowed silently that he would rather lose the Caldwell fortune than lose the girl who unknowingly held his entire world in her tired but tender hands. Days blended into weeks, yet for Ethan Caldwell, each sunrise carried a heavier secret than the last, because every passing moment beside Aurora Bennett stitched him deeper into a bond he both cherished and feared. A bond born not of wealth or status, but of whispered conversations shared in dim hallways, of coffee cups exchanged in silence after her grueling shifts, of quiet walks under Boston's restless city lights where her laughter, rare and hesitant at first, became the only melody he craved to hear. He found himself rearranging meetings, skipping dinners, ignoring calls from a world of shareholders and high society that no longer thrilled him, all for the stolen seconds he spent watching her push cleaning carts with quiet dignity, her chestnut hair falling loose around her tired yet luminous hazel eyes. To Aurora, Ethan was a kind stranger, a man she believed to be a modest business consultant, a confidant who asked about her day without judgment, who listened to her stories as if every word she uttered was valuable. She had long buried her dreams under the weight of endless responsibilities. Her mother's illness, the debt piling higher each month, the exhaustion that sank into her bones. But with Ethan, those dreams began to stir again, fragile and uncertain yet alive. She dared to imagine a life where she wasn't defined by scrubbing marble floors or counting tips to afford medication, a life where someone truly saw her for who she was beneath the uniform and calloused hands. Ethan saw her more than anyone ever had, and it terrified him. For beneath his warm gaze and gentle questions lay a truth he could not bring himself to confess. He was not merely Ethan the consultant, but the owner of the hotel she worked in, heir to the Caldwell empire, a man whose wealth could pay off her troubles in a heartbeat, yet whose silence risked breaking her heart when the truth surfaced. Each night he lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the glittering skyline, torn between revealing everything and holding back, fearing that her trust, so rare, so precious, would shatter the moment she learned he had concealed his identity. That fear clawed at him most during moments when her vulnerability peeked through. Like when she mentioned her mother's failing health, her voice trembling as she described nights spent at the hospital praying for miracles that never came. Or when she admitted she once wanted to study interior design but traded textbooks for mops to keep food on the table. Ethan's chest ached with every confession. He wanted to fix everything, yet knew that offering money would insult her pride. He longed to give her more than sympathy. He wanted to give her safety, joy, freedom. But above all, he wanted her love untainted by his fortune. Their bond deepened quietly, almost unintentionally, until even silence between them felt full. A glance across the staff corridor was enough to ignite unspoken warmth. A shared coffee in the break room felt intimate, and the brief brushing of hands over a cleaning rag set both their hearts pounding louder than any ballroom orchestra upstairs. It was during one such moment, a quiet evening when most guests had left and Aurora lingered in the storage room repairing a stubborn mop, that the fragile tension between them reached a breaking point. Ethan, who had been inspecting the renovation plans nearby, stepped in to help, crouching beside her on the cold tiled floor. Their hands collided as they both reached for the same handle, skin grazing skin, and time seemed to pause. Neither spoke, but their eyes locked in a storm of emotion neither fully understood. Longing, fear, a question unasked, but felt in every thundering heartbeat. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only them, kneeling amid cleaning supplies caught between propriety and desire. And then reality shattered. Aurora's phone rang sharply, the hospital's name flashing across the screen. Her face drained of color as panic flooded her expression. "My mom, she collapsed," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. Without hesitation, Ethan took her hand, leading her swiftly out into the night, rain beginning to drizzle once more as if mirroring her dread. He drove faster than he ever had, every red light an enemy, every second an eternity, until they reached the sterile glow of the emergency ward. Hours blurred as they sat in cold plastic chairs, the antiseptic scent of bleach and distant beeping machines wrapping them in an eerie silence. Aurora paced, hands trembling, whispering prayers under her breath. Ethan remained close, offering quiet words, steadying her when she faltered, never once leaving her side. In that hospital corridor, under flickering lights and heavy hearts, something unspoken passed between them. Not a confession, not yet, but a promise forming in silence. That no matter the storm ahead, neither of them would face it alone. And as Aurora finally sat beside him, exhausted tears streaking her cheeks, Ethan realized the truth he'd been avoiding. That this wasn't mere attraction or sympathy. This was love, raw and terrifying, and it was already far too deep to walk away from. Madeline Whitmore had always believed power guaranteed loyalty, and loyalty guaranteed possession, but the past few weeks had shattered that illusion. Ethan's growing distance was a wound to her pride she couldn't ignore, and when whispered rumors of a lowly hotel cleaner capturing his attention reached her ears, something venomous bloomed inside her, an obsession not to lose love, for she never loved him, but to protect her social throne. With a cold smile and sharper resolve, she ordered private investigators to dig into Aurora Bennett's past. Her every heartbreak, every unpaid bill, every hospital visit turned into ammunition. Within days, tabloids were flooded with lurid headlines painting Aurora as a shameless gold digger, a woman climbing into wealth through pity and seduction. And though Aurora had no idea where the sudden storm came from, the whispers began before she stepped through the hotel doors. Pitying glances from coworkers, muttered insults from strangers, mocking laughter trailing her in the hallways she once walked unnoticed. Humiliation clawed at her chest as she scrubbed floors now stained with judgment instead of dust, her once quiet resilience cracking under cruel eyes. When she finally confronted Ethan in the dim storage corridor, chest heaving from both fury and heartbreak, the weight of weeks of confusion poured out in a trembling voice. "Why are they saying these things about me? Why is my life in the news?" Ethan froze, the carefully built lie unraveling in seconds under her gaze, and with a pained sigh he spoke the truth he should have long ago. That he was not merely a consultant, but the billionaire heir to the very hotel she served, that he had fallen for her the moment she stepped into his car that rainy night, that every word he'd spoken about loving her heart had been true but shadowed by cowardice. Aurora's tears welled, not just from the revelation of his wealth, but from the fracture of trust, every moment replaying now under the cruel light of deceit. "You lied to me," she whispered, voice breaking like fragile glass, and though Ethan's own eyes shimmered with remorse as he reached for her hand, his plea trembled in the air. "I wanted you to love me, not for my money." But Aurora stepped back, pain eclipsing every other emotion. And in that instant she realized the love she thought was pure had been built on half-truths. The silence between them was deafening, heavier than any storm they'd weathered, thicker than any words that could be spoken. And with trembling steps she walked away, each footfall an echo of heartbreak reverberating down the hotel's endless halls, leaving Ethan alone amid the quiet wreckage of a confession delivered too late. Weeks passed in aching silence, the echo of Aurora's footsteps down the hotel corridor, replaying endlessly in Ethan's mind, each memory a fresh reminder of the night she walked away from him, her tears burning deeper than any insult could. Days stretched into nights where he buried himself in work he couldn't focus on, boardrooms feeling colder, luxury meaningless because no amount of wealth could fill the hollow she had left behind. He thought of her constantly, scrubbing floors in silence, sitting beside her mother in sterile hospital rooms, forcing a brave smile to hide her pain. And every thought carved deeper guilt into his chest, for he knew that all she ever wanted was truth, and truth was the one thing he had withheld. Aurora, meanwhile, tried to harden her heart, burying herself in triple shifts and endless hospital visits, convincing herself she despised him. Yet every time the rain returned to Boston streets, her chest tightened with memories of the night they met, the stranger's warm voice offering her a ride, the fisherman, yelling of safety she hadn't known in years. Denial couldn't erase longing, no matter how hard she worked. It was on one such stormy night, thunder rumbling distantly, that fate intervened. The hotel's grand ballroom lay empty after a lavish gala, crystal chandeliers still glowing softly, gold confetti littering the polished floor where Aurora now knelt, silently wiping away the last traces of spilled wine. The world outside was chaos, but here it was still, until the door creaked open. Aurora stiffened, expecting another careless guest, but froze when her eyes lifted to the doorway. Ethan stood there, rain clinging to his suit, hair damp and unruly, a single white rose trembling in his hand like an unspoken apology. His voice broke the silence, low and raw. "Aurora, I can't breathe without you." And for the first time she saw him not as a millionaire, not as a liar, but as a man stripped bare by love and regret. Her heart betrayed her anger, tears rising unbidden as she whispered through shaking lips, "You broke me, Ethan. How can I trust you again?" The question hung in the air heavier than the storm itself. Ethan stepped closer, cautious, his shoes silent on marble, each breath measured as though the wrong word might send her running again. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving it," he vowed, voice trembling with quiet conviction, and in that moment Aurora's walls began to tremble, not fall but crack enough for light to seep through. Silence followed, not empty but charged, the kind that hums with unsaid feelings, the kind where every heartbeat feels deafening. Their hands reached out at the same moment, tentative at first, then intertwining as if instinct remembered what their minds had forgotten, that they belonged nowhere but here. Aurora's tears spilled freely now, tracing lines down her cheeks, and Ethan's thumb moved gently to wipe them away, his touch reverent, almost afraid. He leaned closer, their foreheads meeting softly, breaths mingling in fragile unison. The chandeliers above cast halos across their faces, illuminating the raw vulnerability between them. Ethan whispered, barely audible, "No more lies." And Aurora, though still trembling, whispered back, "No more pain," as though sealing a fragile truce neither dared to break. Then, in the stillness, their lips met, slow, aching, honest, a kiss not born of desire alone but of longing and forgiveness, of two wounded souls finding home again. The world fell away. No wealth, no titles, no storms. Just them, clinging to each other beneath golden light. When they parted, foreheads still touching, neither spoke, for words would only cheapen what silence already knew. That despite everything, love had survived. In that quiet ballroom, amidst rain and ruins, they chose each other again. The kiss that had healed broken pieces just hours ago became the only warmth Ethan clung to as morning light crept into a reality far colder. Because love, though reborn, was about to face its fiercest storm, his family. The moment Ethan walked into his father's study, the air was sharp with disapproval, the elder Caldwell's piercing gaze slicing through him like glass. "So it's true," his father began, voice laced with venom. "You've thrown away decades of legacy for a cleaning girl?" Ethan stood tall, jaw tight, refusing to let shame touch Aurora's name. "I've chosen someone who makes me human," he answered quietly, a statement that only fueled his father's rage. The older man slammed a hand onto the mahogany desk, voice rising. "Love doesn't pay bills, son. Empires are not built on fairy tales. But Ethan's reply came steady, defiant. Neither does marrying someone I don't love. Silence followed, tense, dangerous. Madeline, lurking just beyond the door, caught every word, her emerald eyes glinting with malicious glee. If the father's wrath didn't tear them apart, she would. But it was, and her schemes that shattered Aurora. It was the confrontation she stumbled upon by accident. Passing the study with cleaning supplies in hand, Aurora froze at the sound of raised voices and names that shouldn't have been hers in that room. She heard Ethan defending her, yes, but she also heard the brutal disdain in his father's tone, the threats of disinheritance, the cold reminder that her presence was tearing Ethan from everything he had ever known. Her chest tightened, not from shame, but from fear. Fear that loving her would ruin him. Quietly, she slipped away before Ethan could see her trembling hands or tear-stained cheeks. That night, alone in her small apartment, she stared at the note she had written and rewritten a dozen times, words blurring through tears. Thank you for loving me when I didn't even love myself. But this is goodbye. She left it where he would find it, tucked gently inside his car, the same car where their story began. By dawn, Aurora was gone, vanishing into the city's anonymity, leaving behind only that single confession of gratitude and heartbreak. When Ethan found the note hours later, standing in the rain by the empty parking lot, the world seemed to collapse around him. The man who had inherited empires now stood powerless, clutching a fragile scrap of paper like it was the last thread holding him to life. Rain clung to Ethan's face, though he could no longer tell where the storm ended and his own tears began. The note trembled in his hands, words etched in Aurora's delicate script, cutting deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever could. Thank you for loving me when I didn't even love myself. But this is goodbye. For weeks, he searched Boston's streets, scouring bus stations, shelters, tiny diners she might have passed through, each dead end carving despair deeper into his chest, each sleepless night spent replaying her voice until Hostian stole him into dreams where she always slipped away before he could hold her. Months passed. Madeline's schemes collapsed under exposure. Her cruelty laid bare when investigators revealed she had orchestrated the tabloid smear against Aurora. And Ethan severed ties with the Caldwell Empire in an act of quiet rebellion, leaving behind gilded halls and hollow wealth to build something honest from the ground up. He poured himself into a small startup, working with the same hands that once only signed checks, learning humility in late nights and hard-earned victories. Success found him, not because of his last name, but because for the first time he was building for love, not legacy. And then, one windswept evening by the sea, fate answered prayers whispered into countless sleepless nights. A tip from a kind stranger led him to a sleepy coastal town, where gulls cried above weathered docks and salt clung to every breeze. There, tucked on the corner of a cobblestone street, stood a tiny cafe painted soft blue, its windows glowing warm against the chill. Ethan's heart pounded as he stepped inside, the soft chime of the door carrying him into a scene frozen in time. Aurora behind the counter, her hair tied back, apron dusted with flour, eyes tired yet softer than he remembered. She looked up, a mug in hand, and the world stopped. The air between them shifted, heavy with months of longing and silence. Her breath caught, hands trembling as porcelain nearly slipped from her grasp. "Why are you here?" she whispered, the question sharp but fragile, as though afraid the answer might break her all over again. Ethan stepped forward slowly, his voice low and unsteady. "Because home isn't a place, Aurora. It's you." The cafe hushed around them, the hum of conversation fading as time narrowed to just two souls rediscovering each other. He told her everything, how he had walked away from the Caldwell fortune, how he had faced his father's wrath and Madeline's venom, how he had built something of his own, piece by piece, not to impress her, but to prove that love, real love, could survive stripped of riches. Aurora listened in silence, tears brimming, memories of betrayal colliding with the raw sincerity in his eyes. When he reached into his coat pocket, she braced for glittering excess. A diamond worth millions, a gesture loud enough to drown doubt. But instead, he pulled out a single white rose, delicate and simple, the same flower he had carried the night they confessed in the ballroom's golden light. Dropping to one knee on the cafe's worn wooden floor, surrounded by the scent of salt and coffee, Ethan's voice trembled yet rang with conviction. "Aurora Bennett, will you marry me?" The world seemed to hold its breath. Aurora's tears spilled freely now, streaking her cheeks as months of pain, longing, and buried hope unraveled all at once. She stepped forward, hands covering her mouth, her answer a choked whisper that shattered the silence. Yes. In that moment, applause erupted from strangers who knew nothing of their history yet felt the weight of their reunion. Outside, waves crashed against the shore as if cheering fate's overdue kindness. Ethan rose, pulling her into his arms, and their kiss tasted of salt, from sea air, from tears, from everything they had endured to reach this fragile, perfect moment. It was not passion alone but forgiveness, not luxury but promise, the sealing of a vow that neither storms nor silence could ever break again. When they pulled apart, foreheads resting together, Aurora whispered through trembling laughter, "You're still my ride on a rainy night." And Ethan smiled, voice barely audible, "And you're my forever home." Under the open sky, as dusk painted the horizon gold, they stepped outside hand in hand, the white rose cradled between them. A symbol not of wealth, but of love reborn from ashes. And as the ocean breeze wrapped around them, carrying away every scar of yesterday, they knew this was more than an ending.